recording within 24 hours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today for our TMLT webinar series. Today we are going to be talking about managing your online presence. Our webinar today is going to be presented by attorney Karin Zaner and Sara Bergmanson. Karin is a frequent speaker to physician groups on the topics of peer review and credentialing, as well as other pressing healthcare issues affecting the medical profession. She is on the Advisory Council for the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin, a member of the College of the State Bar of Texas, and past president of the Texas Health Lawyers Association. Her extensive yet handy physician's guides provide basic information to doctors, outline certain practical realities of medicine, and offer insights on best practices. Joining us again today is Sara Bergmanson. She is TMLT's digital and social media specialist. She manages TMLT's online presence and contributes to creating email, social media, and content marketing campaigns. Since joining TMLT 6 years ago, she's helped develop TMLT's digital marketing strategy and implement several new digital marketing tools. Sara has a background in public relations, and before joining TMLT, worked for local Austin companies, setting up their social media and public relations campaigns. Thank you, ladies, both for joining us today. We're really excited to share this presentation with you. Before we get started, a couple of disclaimers and disclosures letting you know that Zaner Law has no commercial affiliations or interest with this talk. We also let you know that these are supplemental resources only. They're not to be referred to as a primary legal source, so please keep that in mind as we move forward through the presentation. And we will discuss today, again, identifying key issues in online reputation management, explaining strategies that can be used to improve your online reputation, and discussing how to respond to negative online reviews. So before we get started, we have a poll question here for you all today. Do you maintain any social media accounts on yourself or practice? We'll give you all a couple of minutes to answer this poll. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, other. And it looks like the majority, there is quite a presence of social media accounts, Facebook being the primary one. So Sara, at this time, I will turn this presentation over to you.
All right, so I've unmuted myself. Hopefully the sound is good. Happy to see that several of you are on social media. I think most of the world is, and that kind of goes into my first slide here about the importance of managing your online reputation. It is a consumer habit, a habit amongst all consumers these days, no matter whether you're looking for a new restaurant to try or buying a new product on Amazon or looking for a new doctor, you're going to turn to the internet. And maybe you don't discover your doctor on the internet, but for example, if you are referred to, if a patient's referred to you or a practice by a friend or a colleague, they're still going to go to the internet and kind of check you out, check out your website and things like that. So moving along, trying to figure out, okay, there we go. Google yourself. If you haven't done it before, I think this is a good first step to make. And I know Karen's going to speak more about this from a risk management perspective, and I'm going to talk about it from a marketing and branding perspective. So when you Google yourself, you want to make sure your website appears high in the search results. So also making sure that it's at the top. So most people don't navigate to the second page. I'm sure you know from your own experience, but there is research that indicates that most people, when they Google something, they don't navigate past the first page, and a lot of times they probably don't even look or scroll to the bottom of the first page. So making sure you have good search engine optimization on your website is a good best practice. And I know that's a little, maybe a little marketing lingo that you might not have heard of. But search engine optimization is what helps you appear high in the search results. And this is something that goes for, like, if you own your own practice, then you definitely want to look at this, from your business standpoint. But if you don't own your own practice and you're just thinking of managing your online reputation for your personal brand or you as an individual, then if you have a website, then that still applies in that area. Online reviews, I know Karen's going to touch more about this, but I'm going to skip over to social media. So if you have active profiles, then that's going to appear in the search results. If you do have, for example, a personal Facebook page that maybe you don't want to appear in a search result, then I know that Facebook has some privacy settings to where you can say, I don't want my personal page to appear on Google searches. And I think there's even a setting where you could say you don't want your personal page to be discovered within the Facebook search. So that means, like, if somebody searches your name in Facebook, you can set it to where your profile doesn't appear. And I think there's different settings across the different platforms. So that's something to look into if you don't want your personal pages to appear. And so the benefits, it can make up for the lost time in the exam room, and I think when it's done well and with the correct professional boundaries in place, managing your online reputation or building that online community with your patients really can be powerful in fostering more conversation, a better connection, and it's an opportunity to also attract new patients. And so on this slide, I list a few ways to think about communicating with patients online. This isn't a comprehensive list, but I think kind of covers the main things. You can send them an email newsletter. You can add a blog to your website, podcasts, webinars, and a lot of those things too you can cross promote. Like, for example, if you do write a blog, then you can push that out to your patients through an email newsletter or via social media, and the same with podcasts and webinars. And you don't have to do all these things. They're just things to think about or consider. And the benefits of reading your online reviews. Don't be afraid to read those. But it is a good opportunity to notice if there's any patterns or areas for improvement. If you're getting good reviews, then it's also an opportunity to compliment your staff and kind of give employee recognition. And so moving on to examples. So here are just two examples of the many examples out there of some physician blogs. My first example is Dr. Wendy Swanson. She kind of rose to fame with her blog called Mama Doc. And she started this blog, I think, in the 90s or early 2000s. And she saw it as an opportunity to get trustworthy information out there to new parents who maybe are up at 3 o'clock in the morning Googling, how do I get my baby to go to sleep, or how do I get my baby to stop crying? So she saw it as an opportunity there when there was not a lot of information out there. And so she was one of the early adopters in healthcare to use social media and blogging, and she's been a pretty vocal thought leader in using digital media to communicate with patients and parents. She's a pediatrician. And the next example I show is a blog called 33 Charts, and this one is written by a physician in Houston. His Dr. Brian Vardabadian. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, so I apologize. In his blog, he actually writes for a physician audience, and so he's also a pediatrician, but his blog mostly touches on healthcare technology and the intersection of medicine and healthcare IT and that kind of thing. So those are just two good examples, I think, of the different approaches you can take to blogging, thinking about whether you want to write for patients or maybe write specific to your specialty. And then moving on to examples of physicians on social media. So on any of the platforms, you can easily find some public profiles. You can search related hashtags to your specialty and kind of explore what's going on that way. But I'm listing Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter because those seem to be the more commonly used platforms for like having a public profile, whereas LinkedIn is more for your professional network. And I think Facebook, people are kind of tend to use that for personal use, but I know you can have a Facebook business page, and that's certainly an option too. And so with social media there's been the rise in, the social media celebrities or social media influencers. And this is actually a really good opportunity for healthcare professionals to battle misinformation and build their own personal brands and just be that trustworthy source, because, the internet has so much garbage out there. And so this example I grabbed from an article, and I linked that article if you're interested in reading more. But the article is talking about the rise in healthcare influencers on social media, and it was pretty interesting. And I grabbed some screenshots from his Instagram page just to show you an example of the kinds of things he posts about. So that first screenshot there, it's a post where it's a video post, and he's answering frequently asked questions about a specific surgery that he performs. And he also claims in his post that it's his favorite procedure. And then the post below is a video where he's talking about specifically your digestive organs and how they work when you are eating food. So two examples of like the types of things that you could post about. You could post about the surgeries you're doing, or just talk about the organs or body parts, fun facts, like things like that. And so then my next example, I also grabbed from the same article, but it's a dentist, and she claims that almost 75% of her new patients have found her through Instagram, and that it's given her a competitive edge in an already saturated market. And so what I really liked about her post in my second screenshot, I'm not really sure how well you can read that, but it's a video, and it's her giving a tour of her office and her practice, and then in her caption she's talking about how she wanted to create a boutique style dental practice, and she only does certain things because she felt like she was being called to a certain niche area in her practice. And so I just thought that was a really good example of how you can showcase yourself and maybe talk more about yourself. But then the first example is a video where she's talking about teeth whitening and sensitivities around that. So those just examples to show you how doctors are using social media and what they're posting about. And this wraps up my slides, but I'll just end it with, if you're interested in trying blogging or using social media but not really sure where to start or what to say, just don't overthink it. I know a lot of people always struggle with like, well, what am I going to say in my caption? And I do that too. I manage TMLT social media, and I'm always, that's my ongoing battle. But I also will say from my experience that it's always the posts that I least expect to do well or get a lot of engagement. And then the posts that I end up like spending a lot of time on and dwelling over are the ones that end up not being as engaging. So you'll just have to experiment and just try and see what resonates, and have some fun with it, and yeah, just don't overthink it. And so I'm going to pass it over to Karin, and she'll talk more about risk management, but I'll be sticking around for the end if you have any questions for me. Oh, looks like we got a quick poll first. Kathy, did you want me to read this? Yeah, so go ahead and answer the poll if you've ever Googled yourself. Looks like a lot of you have, so good.
All right, Sara, thank you so much. This is Karin Zaner. Thank you to everyone who is listening in. And if there's ever a time to focus on social media, now would be the time, because it really is, because of what we've seen this year, I'll say pandemic, what we've seen this year has really changed everything related to how patients are going to be dealing with their healthcare providers. And so now's the time. Sara, great presentation, and I love, hers is the fun part. You get to explore, you get to figure out what's good for your practice, the kind of style that you want to have, the kind of presence you want to have to your patients, and that really is, I agree with the not overthinking it, because that's the creative part of it. I'm the attorney part of it and the risk management part of it, and so my part of the presentation is more going to be focused on, you do need to think about it. So I think there's places for both. Sara's part is very important, and she'll have some resources that I'll talk about in my part of the presentation that I'm going to recommend that you utilize. My part of it really will focus on risk management and how you navigate without getting yourself and your practice in places you don't want to be. So where do we start? Where do we always start? At least what I find my presentations as an attorney to physicians. Where do I usually start? And that's with the AMA ethics opinions and the American Medical Association ethics opinions. And we do have one on social media. It was created in 2011, but it's still very applicable today. And what I did, that opinion is available online. It's wordier than what I've put in these slides. But it does go through specifically 6 considerations that should be weighed as a physician when you're determining what to do for your online presence. And I've paraphrased these to make them shorter, to be able to just sort of talk about each point. But keep these in mind as you're moving forward and determining what you're individually doing as a physician, that you're at least considering these points. And then I will make a note, mostly I'm talking about physicians who are directing their own practices, whether through a PA or through a small group where the physician is actually in the decision-making authority, partner, or a sole practitioner. If you're an employee, if you're an employed physician, then I think you have to sort of look at it differently and make sure that whatever you're doing comports with the policies and procedures of your employer. And if you're posting and you're doing so professionally, that you're actually getting consent, making sure that they're aware of what you're posting to make sure you're not getting crosswise with your employer. So it's a little bit of a different analysis. But either way, as a physician, these considerations will affect you, and we aim towards doing what's best ethically through these opinions. And so the first one is, being cognizant of the standards of patient privacy and confidentiality, and that's the big one here. Throughout this, my presentation, you're going to continue to hear me say, you've got to make sure that you're safeguarding patient privacy and confidentiality, and the big buzzwords for that, of course, are HIPAA, the federal patient privacy law, as well as state patient privacy statutes. And so generally, the rule here that you're going to want to be aware of is that you've got to make sure and not post or divulge or communicate any identifiable patient information online. Even in the response to an online negative review where a patient is actually raising the issue. Because the patient can do that, and we'll get into that here shortly, but you can't, because you're a covered entity and you're not allowed to respond with any patient information. And so that's the most important thing to come away with from this session, is that you've really got to hold on, not respond, not divulge anything online, because you may be in violation, you probably are in violation of HIPAA as well as patient privacy statutes state by state. The second consideration is using privacy settings to safeguard your own personal content. The privacy settings are not going to be absolute, so you're going to want to use them, but you're also going to want to remember that just because you're using privacy settings doesn't mean that the content will not somehow become public. Once it's on the internet, it's likely there permanently. And then also just generally routinely monitoring that information to make sure that it's accurate and appropriate. The third consideration in the AMA Ethics Opinion 9.124 is if you interact with patients on the internet, you have to still maintain appropriate boundaries of the physician-patient relationship. And so really the idea is that before the internet, there were appropriate boundaries between physicians and patients related to the relationship, whether it happened in the office, at a hospital, whether it happens on the telephone. However it happens, those standards continue to be standards, and physicians have got to observe them. That does not change on the internet. And so making sure that you're remembering that even though you might have a personal Facebook page, or you might access a patient's personal Facebook page, that those boundaries still exist. The fourth consideration is pretty simply just make sure that you're separating personal from professional content online. That's really important. Not that on your professional website you can't have a place where you talk to them about your kids, your hobbies, the things you do personally, but at the same time, if you're going to have a personal Facebook page or Twitter account or whatever it is that you have, you want to make sure and have a very clear demarcation from your professional one, and to maintain that, because that's really important. The fifth consideration, and I sort of have an issue with this because it doesn't always, it just sort of, to me it's another category, but it's actually in the opinion. But it actually says, if you see unprofessional content posted by colleagues, then you might bring that to their attention, and if they don't remove it or take other appropriate action, you as a physician might, if it's significantly problematic, you might consider reporting it to appropriate authorities. So that's in the policy. I'm not going to cover that today, but just be aware that that's in the ethics opinion. And then the last one is just sort of reiterating everything. I think recognizing that the content posted may negatively affect your reputation and may have serious consequences for your medical career, and can undermine the public trust in the medical profession. And that just goes back to what you as physicians, I think what you all must know, which is your record and professional reputation is your most important asset, and it can be precarious given the inquiries that are made, and by licensing authorities, by hospitals, by other professional societies, to make sure that you have a clear record, and that you're doing, you're upholding the trust, the public trust in the medical profession. So that's just that. Again, that's the standard, the AMA ethics opinion standard that says what physicians should be aiming for. Okay, so back to the Google question that we just had. I was glad to see so many people have Googled themselves. Believe me, it might be painful, and I also Google myself. I think it's really important to do, but and I do it regularly, and I recommend that you do it regularly, but I always sort of get that little pit in my stomach before I press the button, because I'm thinking, what if something really bad shows up? And so you just kind of, get through the pain, realize that's part of what you do, and the reality is, it'll probably just show up like you think it will. But investigate what you see, because you need to know these things, so that you can address them. One mechanism you also might do is add a Google alert. And that's a function, and you can just Google, how do I add Google alert, and walk through the steps. But what that does is, to the extent that your name is raised in anything that's Google accessible, then you'll actually get a Google alert that that's happened, so you can look at it right away instead of relying on the regular, every couple weeks looking at whether or not your Google profile is still the same. So I would advise that. Sara said to do it. I say to do it. There's no reason why you shouldn't do it, other than just forgetting about it or being nervous about it. And the reality is, you just need to make it a priority in your practice. So okay, so what shows up with your Google search? Obviously, you're probably going to have your profiles on your website. If you have hospitals or other entities that you practice at, those profiles might come out, medical societies, various professional organizations, and you want to see that because that actually shows the person who's Googling you that those are the things that are the content there. Those are the things that come up, and those are the things you want them to see instead of nothing, right? Your content's really important, and so when we talk about content, you want to make sure and keep that current. You want to make sure it's reliable. Make sure it's, if you have sources, you want to make sure they're reliable sources. If you're linking to other websites, you want to make sure that first of all you're giving them credit and that their information is reliable. The blogs are wonderful. I see the examples that Sara gave us, and I'm thinking, boy, if I had time to do that, that would be lovely. But you also have to, balance the time commitment because blogs in particular require maintenance and require updated content. And so, another alternative I think is focusing on perhaps professional articles, and those, once you get good articles, just spend some time when you can generating articles. You can actually use those for different purposes. And so maybe that's a better way to do it instead of marrying yourself to a blog that actually requires you to do things once a week or at least once a month. But be realistic with the time commitment that you're going to have because you're practicing physician and you're probably late at the office doing medical records. So just be realistic with what you can do, but also remember that you need to keep your content fresh and reliable. So putting time into it's important. Your Google searches may result in health grades, RateMDs, Vitals websites, and so to the extent that there's information that you can submit to those entities, then you would probably want to look into doing that just to continue to show that you're updated, you're keeping information current. And then the other categories, Google, Yelp, LinkedIn, others, just whatever you can do in order to make sure that those reflect the accurate information, as well as take advantage of the content that's available in those websites. Good reviews, I think the legal term is for that, yay, hooray. Bad reviews, boo. We'll discuss those shortly, but you need to look at them and you need to investigate what you find. And then also I would suggest that when you have third-party entities like we're talking about, you might want to determine in those entities if there's any mechanisms for how to improve, contest, or remove any information. Looking at the procedures, I think, gets you familiar with what happens if you actually get a negative review on one of those sites. Now, I would say to pause and think about what you're going to do before you actually submit something, and that's going to be, again, emphasizing the patient confidentiality and HIPAA restrictions for how you do that, not only if you respond to the patient directly online, but also if you submit information to third parties in whatever procedures or processes that they may have in order to contest or remove information. Because it's any time you're submitting information to third parties that you might be in violation of HIPAA or patient privacy statutes. So determine what their rules, what their processes are, but before you actually do anything, you want to think twice about doing that and how you do it. Okay, I think we have a poll, and here's the question. What are some appropriate ways to address negative online reviews? So we'll have some options there.
So we'll give you just a moment to answer what are the appropriate ways to address negative online reviews, and you can select as many as you would like. Karin, it looks like we have quite a few options there.
Okay. Ooh, okay, so I do like these results because the first one, we have a very low percentage of people saying yes, that's what we should do, and so generally I would not recommend this first option of terminating the physician-patient relationship immediately, even though you might feel like you want to do that. I mean, come on, it's like you want to hang up the phone. Thanks, patient who I was trying to help very much. But you know, you got to realize that's an emotion, that's a feeling, and you kind of pull back and determine, well, what can I do here? What do I need to do? And the biggest concern I would have would be the allegation of patient abandonment, because when you do decline to see a patient and decide to terminate a relationship, the Texas Medical Board requires reasonable notice to that patient. So notice in writing, as well as a reasonable time period to make sure that they've found another doctor or they have the medical care that they need. So I could not recommend that option. It may be something that ends up happening. Maybe it may be what you determine that you do, but you don't want to do it just off the cuff without any determination of how you do it and giving notice to the patient. Call an attorney. Hey, why not? I'm an attorney, and to the extent that I have a physician who calls me and says, hey, here's what I'm dealing with, then that's my practice is all about helping physicians in that position. So certainly that's an option. As we'll get in the presentation, I will talk to you about whether or not that ends up being a good option that actually ends up in any real remedy for you. Make an inquiry to the website involved. That's always something you can do. But what you don't want to do is you want to wait to submit any information, because again, you got to determine whether or not that's going to be a violation of HIPAA or patient privacy. So finding out more about the review and if there's any processes is fine, but giving them information, submitting information, you're probably going to hold off. You're going to want to hold off, and you may even want to get counsel involved if that's what you decide you're going to do, because that counsel can help you determine what's appropriate versus what's not appropriate information. The next one, respond online in an open and honest way. I don't mind the honest way, but at the same time, the open and honest way, again, you're not going to want to say anything that compromises your duties as a covered entity to comply with HIPAA for this patient. And even addressing any of their medical care, even though the patient is the one who's addressing that and raised the issue, as a physician, the covered entity, you cannot respond that way online. What you're going to want to do is route that through the patient channels through your practice. The last option, respond online with a general message that does not acknowledge that the complaint is your patient. Yeah, I mean, we've got tons of people saying, yeah, that's an appropriate way to do it. So I would agree with that. And Sarah's got we've got some resources at the end, and Sarah's got some slides where she actually gives some very good responses that are very general, very appropriate, that direct the patient back to the actual practice, so that that problem can be addressed in the context of the physician-patient relationship through the practice portal or through the practice phone call or a visit. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so don't respond to a patient online. I mean, if you haven't gotten that from this webinar yet, then please do. Don't respond to a patient online. HIPAA and patient privacy may be violated. And so no physician should respond to online content from a current or past patient or their family members, because, again, you are the covered entity. And even though they can give you the information, they can post online every detail about themselves and their medical case, you can't respond even with acknowledging them, because that's going to you're going to be generating or communicating protected health information. So the best thing to do is to route the patient to the office and respond individually by phone, by follow-up appointment, through the patient portal. In other words, routing them back through the practice so that you can treat them, so that you can follow up with their concern is the best thing you can do. A generic message can be sent. We are sorry. Again, at the end of the presentation, Sara will talk about her slides and the resources that are there in order to furnish you with some good answers to that. But generally, you're not going to want to disclose anything, even the fact that they're your patient. Moving on. Okay, so bad reviews, and I don't know. I think we're actually compounding the Streisand effect here. If anybody has heard what that is, we're compounding it here because the nature of this concept is based on this picture and a lawsuit that was brought many years ago. So generally, this concept is, and I'll just go to the first bullet point and read it, the simple act of trying to repress what you do not like online may lead to more people who would have never seen it to see it. And so back in 2003, Barbara Streisand sued a photographer who posted a video of her home, that's the prior slide, for a violation of privacy and requested removal of the image and $50 million. And so before the lawsuit, the image had been downloaded from the photographer's website 6 times, and 2 of those were by her attorneys. After the case, more than 420,000 people visited the site. The lawsuit was dismissed, and Streisand had to pay the photographer's legal fees. But even this is in Wikipedia now. I mean, like I said, right now we are compounding it because of the focus that otherwise probably would have never happened if she wouldn't have brought a lawsuit. So that's something I think you want to continue to remember, is the more you focus on it, the more you try to repress it, the more I think more people might hear about it, probably will hear about it. So what you want to do, you want to encourage and enable good reviews. Your patients love you. They've been coming to you for years. Who better to write reviews and give you feedback? And like Sara said, the feedback's important because you may have missed some things that can be easily corrected if you just put attention to it. So it's all very important. It's part of the respect for the patient relationship is to actually listen to what the patients are saying. Patient surveys after appointments, they've just seen you, they love you, they're coming back. So having a patient survey then is certainly the opportune time to find out what their opinions are. But even reaching out actively when they're not in the office is a good mechanism. The helpful content online that we talked about, want to post that, maybe the patients will respond generally. And then marketing strategies for physician practices are bound. I mean, finding a reputable company and investing resources in your online presence is something that I think at this point, you have to do. You're missing an opportunity. In fact, you'll be compared to other practices if you don't do it. So now's the time. Research, make sure that you're dealing with marketing companies that have experience in physician practices, and including things like making sure that they're agreeing to sign a business associates agreement, because of the physician's practice, you're going to be dealing with patient names and identities. And so to the extent that a marketing company either hasn't heard of a business associates agreement, a BAA, or has heard of it but won't sign one, that's a red flag that maybe they don't have the experience that you need them to have when it comes to helping physician practices. Okay, moving along. Threats of legal action. This is the good stuff. This is the stuff that I deal with, and I think you have to be really careful. Let's take it a couple ways. I mean, we'll talk about here in a few slides. You want to sue the patient because they posted something so horrible about you, and what your options are and what your thinking should be, the considerations that you should have in that. But let's first talk about what happens when a patient indicates that a legal action may be taken by them, and that takes a little bit of a different approach. One thing that you can do, you probably should do, depending on whether it's a threat, whether it's coming, whether it's vague, but you can call your malpractice carrier, and because they can give instructions, and if it really is something that's going to be filed, help you engage counsel to determine what your next steps are. So that's in the circumstance if a patient's threatening a malpractice suit, if a patient threatens a Texas Medical Board complaint, or if a patient threatens HIPAA or other regulatory complaint. You're also going to want to document any kind of threat or communication in the office records, your patient file, per your regular office policies. And office policies differ, but just make sure that you're going through and you're doing it per your office policy. And, you know, when it comes to, for example, a TMB complaint, you also have to watch out for what your next steps are. So, for example, in the TMB complaint situation, you're probably going to want to disengage hiring counsel or having counsel, you know, as a resource, because there may be consequences if you do interact with the patient once that's happened. So, for example, we've got a occupations code site there that defines unprofessional and dishonorable conduct, which is what the Texas Medical Board can add as grounds to whatever complaint, and therefore punish a physician, take action against a physician's license. But one of the grounds is intimidation of a complainant. So, you know, you have a TMB complaint made, and then you go to try to call the patient, and all of a sudden you're getting another ground in addition to the original complaint because you tried to talk with them. So I think you really got to be careful when it comes to Texas Medical Board complaints. A similar thing with malpractice complaints. Again, you're notifying your carrier to help them guide you through what you need to do and what counsel you may need to engage in order to make sure you're doing the right things and not doing the wrong things when it comes to those sorts of situations. So you don't want to make it worse for yourself. So so just some things to be cautious about. Okay, so what about filing suit against the patient? So again, we're going to go back to the Streisand effect. You know, you've got online complaints, and one or two, and they're pretty, you know, offensive. You know, you may not want to highlight them too much because that may be exactly what happens. Do you send a cease and desist letter? You have your attorney, or you find an attorney to tell them to stop. Well, I mean, frankly, that may in fact cause the patient to consult with an attorney, and all of a sudden you're in a situation where they're filing a medical board complaint, or they may be looking at malpractice complaint. So I think you've got to be real careful with how you react, because that may cause the patient to react even more. So, you know, even if I told you, hey, you know, hire the lawyer, you know, go ahead and let's talk about filing suit, you have to realize that the litigation itself is difficult and expensive. So even if you've got a good case, you find an attorney, the possible causes of action might include something like a defamation, tortious interference, business disparagement type claim. Just, you know, remember, you know, these claims are all torts, so there's going to be heightened standards of proof, including malice, falsity, truth as a defense. So the actual litigation will go through whether or not you're a good doctor or a bad doctor, whether the patient's complaint is true or false or has basis, and that's, you know, typically a lawsuit's going to be a public venue. You might have some protective orders to protect some of the information, but generally suits are going to be in the public forum. It's also hard to prove actual damages. So when you're talking about a negative review, then you really need to realize that actually tying that to real economic damages is going to be really difficult. The other obstacle, and this is since 2011, are what's called the anti-SLAPP statutes. And SLAPP is the acronym. It stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation, so anti-SLAPP. And those essentially protect First Amendment rights to go on and make the online review. And so since that statute has been enacted, there's been some exemptions. So generally, the exemptions might allow for commercial speech or DTPA services, but the medical practices, how they affect the medical practices is really uncertain. And so at this point, I think that the anti-SLAPP statutes really stand in the way of a physician suing a patient for an online review. And when I say standing in the way, what the anti-SLAPP statute allows is a very quick motion to dismiss to dismiss the lawsuit that a physician may bring, and the court's going to be, because of the statute, court's required to award sanctions and attorney's fees. So you might find your lawsuit gone and a pretty, a not insignificant award of attorney's fees and sanctions against you. So it makes it so that, again, if you're contemplating doing this kind of litigation, there's going to be some risks to doing so. Every case is different, though, so just feel free to call an attorney. But at the same time, don't get your hopes up. Okay, and my final slide is really sort of this general maintaining proper boundaries online. What I said earlier is just because we have the tools that are different online, different applications, different social media platforms, it doesn't change the general proper boundaries analysis that you need to have as a physician. Overstepping of boundaries used to be really easy to identify. Again, the example is being in-person interaction over the phone. Now we've got this mechanism that sort of has a life of its own online, but you still have to respect those particular boundaries and make sure that you're observing proper boundaries. Now it's very different, because now we're talking about not a personal interaction, but we're talking about what you're posting online. What does your patient post online? Are you friends with your patient on Facebook? Another issue that we don't have time to go into is how responsible are you for this information? Your patient's posting and maybe some issues of whether or not the patient's going to harm themselves, or their actions are imprudent or somehow risking their health. What's your role as a physician if you're friends with them personally? And so all these boundary issues are really important and only made more complex when we're talking about being online. So just make sure that you're thinking through the issues and you're making good decisions. Again, like Sara said, these sites can enhance trust and communication, can really be a good positive thing, but you just really also have to realize that the problem of crossing proper boundaries remains. And then, moreover, not like a personal conversation or even a conversation on the phone, the internet is public and actually creates a written record. Everything's recorded. And so that just, emphasizes to us all that we've got to be really careful as we use these tools. So that's sort of, I think I've gone over a bit. Hopefully we'll have, I know we'll have time for questions. I just hope everybody hangs on for a while longer if you can, so that we can address some questions. And I thank y'all for attending. And I'm going to pass it back over to Sara to talk about her additional resources.
I'm going to take it, Karin. The additional resources are available as downloads in the lower left-hand corner of this final layout. We are still taking questions, so please feel free to type questions into the Q&A pod. This is approved for 0.5 CME credit. If you are wanting CME credit, you need to do two things for us. First, on the left-hand side, in the CME webinar picture, there is a blue click here. If you'll click there, the evaluation form will be opened in your web browser. So once the webinar ends, you'll be able to see it and complete it. The second thing is, if you're requesting CME for today, if in the gray box in the middle at the bottom you would type your name and your email address, we will make sure you get your CME certificate. So, Karin, I'm going to turn this first question to you. I think you've sort of addressed this, but if a patient leaves an online review and their name is identified in their profile and or their comments, can you address them by name, saying, for example, Mrs. Smith, we're sorry to hear you had a bad experience. We would love to get your feedback on how we can improve. How would you answer that or handle that?
Okay, am I back on? I'm unmuting myself. And yeah, I mean,
yes.
generally, even acknowledging that they're your patient, can be a HIPAA violation, right? And so, if it were me, I'd probably not put the Mrs. Smith part. It doesn't add that much to it. I mean, to me, and I'm a paranoid lawyer who sees the worst cases possible, right? So on the one hand, I get the question. I mean, it's so obvious that Mrs. Smith is the one that's writing it. But at the same time, again, with the biggest principle is that you are the entrusted covered provider. You have this information. You don't want any argument that you let anything that was protected health information out, which would include the name. It also includes identifiable or other details of the patient relationship. So even if it's not name or social security number or date of birth, the definition of protected health information under HIPAA is the information that a third party can reasonably identify the patient with. And so that can be details, and so you really want to stay away from even the details. Even if you don't have the name, date of birth, social security number, address, you're just going to really want to stay away from anything that specifically addresses their case. So to answer the question, I wouldn't do it just because I'm an alarmist lawyer who sees the worst cases. But I get the question, and so I hope that answers your question.
Might want to stay unmuted, Karin. This next one you probably should address as well. A mentally ill former patient has, for 2 years, posted malicious, false, defamatory posts on Facebook. Facebook has been marginally helpful in removing these posts, not recognizing them as hate speech or seeing them as harassment. The person circumvents the website monitors by using aliases in multiple accounts. These rambling, repetitive posts occur several times monthly. My attorney says it's time to seek a restraining order.
I agree.
What
I mean,
do
this
you
is a
think?
case where you've got, it sounds like you have an attorney. There are mechanisms, particularly statutes, that deal with this sort of online harassment, and so absolutely it sounds like you are the type of person who is going to actually be successful in meeting those standards, and I'm sorry for you. That's a horrible thing. And so, but yeah, you need it to stop. So that's what attorneys are for. So I would agree with your attorney.
This is more of a comment, and I'll just share it, and is that the listener thought that there was a case, they thought in Austin, where a medical practice won a lawsuit from a patient posting massive amounts of negative information. And I would just acknowledge that there was a lawsuit. It was originally filed, I think, in 2017, and it was ultimately won in district court. And if you're interested in more information about that, I can send you a link to that if you'll email me at consulting@tmlt.org. But I would point out that was before the anti-SLAPP law was passed, so there could be different considerations now. What does a physician have as an option for recourse when the review is made without the person ever having been seen? So they're not a patient, and you don't have a legal HIPAA obligation.
My opinion is I would treat them as they were a potential patient. These are even potential patients. People who walk into your office and don't end up seeing you or signing anything can complain to the medical board. So I think the analysis that we talked about when it comes to being careful, I mean, if they're not a patient, then I guess the malpractice claims, I mean, although arguably not treating a patient, turning a patient away, could put a physician in jeopardy. So I would say the same considerations would apply. It's similar to what, as an attorney, when I have clients or when I have potential clients, I still have to treat them, including the attorney-client privilege, I still have to respect that and treat them as they were clients. And I think I don't have any reason to believe that the physician-patient confidentiality, even if they're not an actual patient, doesn't still apply. So I would treat them the same way. I think that distinction is not going to be one you can rely on if you ever get a Texas Medical Board complaint filed by this patient for what you did as a physician.
This is another just a comment. I've sent several challenges directly to health grades and vitals, never to the patient, to have reviews removed, and 90% of the time they are removed. So
yeah, except for I'm sorry to jump in, Sarah. And Sarah, chime in whenever you want to. But again, be careful with what you're submitting, because if you're submitting protected health information to a third party, then you have to make sure and have them as a business associate. So it would depend on the actual third party and what the relationship is, and whether or not you have a business associate agreement governing the information you're submitting. So I would want to look more into that. I mean, congratulations on the result. That's a wonderful success, but at the same time, as a physician, I think you've got to be careful to make sure you're not violating HIPAA by submitting information to that third party.
I think that answered the follow-up question as well. Thanks, Karin. I don't think there are any other questions that I'm seeing right this moment. If you have any, we'll take just another few seconds to let you submit those. I would like to thank you for joining us today.
I do.
Sarah, do you have any
just that last comment made me want to kind of point back to what Karin was talking about earlier and encouraging good reviews. I feel like that's a really positive way to approach it. If you're worried about the HIPAA part and maybe you don't want to report it, maybe a patient made a bad review with false claims, and a good way to combat that is to just encourage your happy patients to leave reviews. And it is unethical to say, hey, leave me a 5-star review, but I mean, you could encourage reviews, and then hopefully that encourages the people that have good things to say to go online and say that. And yeah, I just wanted to add that, and then commenting also on the PDF responding to online patient complaints. That's available for download, and we also have it on our resource hub. And it's just a short presentation that gives examples that would be HIPAA compliant for responding to a negative review. And so you can access it from the documents pod, or you can go to our resource hub and just search responding to online patient complaints, and it's there. And that's the last thing I would like to add.
Okay, and then I'll chime in here. Yes. I'm not shy.
Karin,
thank you so much. And Sarah, it's been really fun to do this with you. And please, and if anybody has any questions, my information is on my website, on the materials as well. I do have a physician's guide to social media that really gets into a bunch of different aspects. They're practical tips. They're in the materials. It's the physician's guide to social media, so I welcome. Please look at that, use it as a resource. I also have other guides on my website. That's www.zaner.law, L-A-W. And I've got articles, I've got more guides. In particular, the one that I would focus on would be the Physician's Guide to HIPAA, because that defines protected health information, also defines who's a covered entity, and talks about business associates agreements. So it's really important, I think, for physicians to have working knowledge of these areas, because they don't teach this stuff in medical school, and a lot of times they don't teach it outside of medical school. So please familiarize yourself with those materials. I've also got peer review, credentialing, data bank, employment, all Texas Medical Board guides on there, because it's working information for physicians. So please access, and please let me know if anybody has any questions. I'm here to help.
Okay, we would just invite you to consider joining us next month on September 29th when our topic will be an interview with a cyber attorney, Adrian Senishin. Adrian has been a presenter in the past, and we look forward to having him join us again next month.